Woman crashes the vampire king's son's funeral and declares the prince isn't dead. The royal guards freeze. What no one knew, she could hear his faint heartbeat through the glass coffin, and the desperate vampire king would bargain anything, his throne, his blood, even ancient law, to save the one heir he thought he'd lost forever. The Cathedral of Eternal Night rises like a monument to sorrow, its Gothic spires piercing the November sky as if trying to wound heaven itself. Inside, the air hangs thick with incense and unspoken grief, centuries of vampire tradition pressing down on the assembled nobility like the weight of all their combined years. Candlelight flickers across silk gowns in shades of midnight and blood, across jewels that have adorned vampire throats since before most human nations existed, across faces beautiful and cold and perfectly composed in their mourning. High Priest Moren stands at the altar, his voice rolling through the vaulted space in the old language, words that taste of copper and ash, intoning the final rites over a glass coffin that holds what everyone believes is a corpse. Prince Cassian Thorn lies beneath etched crystal so clear it might as well be air, his face serene in death, his hands crossed over his chest in the traditional pose, wearing the formal attire of his rank with its silver threading and ancient symbols. He looks like a sculpture of grief itself, 23 years frozen in perfection, and every eye in the cathedral cannot look away from that terrible stillness. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from, and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. The Vampire King sits on his throne at the front of the cathedral, Aldrich Thorn in all his ancient majesty, 6 feet 4 inches of controlled devastation wearing a mourning suit tailored to perfection, his midnight black hair shot through with silver at the temples like frost creeping through darkness. His hands grip the throne's armrests so tightly the ancient wood splinters beneath his fingers, tiny cracks spreading like lightning through oak that has survived 500 years of vampire kings, only to break now under the weight of a father's loss. His face reveals nothing, carved from the same stone as the cathedral walls, but his eyes betray him, ice blue and ancient. They stare at his son's coffin with an intensity that makes the air around him shimmer with barely contained power, grief transmuted into something dangerous, something that makes even the oldest vampires shift uncomfortably in their pews. This is his only child, his heir, the son born of an impossible love between vampire and human, the living proof that two species could create something beautiful together. Was. The word tastes like poison. Was his son. Was his heir. Was living proof. The official cause of death has been pronounced by Dr. Silas Vane himself, the most renowned vampire physician in 5 territories, a diagnosis delivered with the certainty of 300 years of medical practice. Sudden heart failure during a diplomatic mission to the human settlements, a tragic accident. A loss that will echo through both vampire and human worlds. The funeral proceeds with inexorable dignity, each ritual performed exactly as tradition demands, as it has been performed for countless vampire nobles throughout the centuries. The organ plays its mournful dirge, notes that seem to pull sorrow from the very stones. Mourners bow their heads. The high priest raises his hands for the final blessing. And then the side door of the cathedral slams open with a crash that shatters 500 years of accumulated silence, wood hitting stone so hard the impact echoes like a gunshot, like a heart starting to beat again after impossible stillness. Every head turns. Guards reach for ceremonial blades that are far more than ceremonial, edges sharp enough to cut through bone and magic alike. Security cameras mounted in the ancient stonework swivel toward the intrusion, red lights blinking like awakening eyes. A woman stands in the doorway, backlit by gray November light, and she looks like everything the cathedral is not. Where the assembled nobility radiates wealth and power and centuries of careful cultivation, she radiates desperation and determination and the particular kind of strength that comes from having nothing left to lose. Her coat is threadbare, once perhaps navy blue, but now faded to the color of old bruises, crusted with street grime, and stains that speak of months sleeping rough. Her auburn hair hangs in matted tangles around a face that might be beautiful if it weren't hollowed by hunger, cheekbones too sharp, eyes too large, skin too pale. Her boots are held together with duct tape and hope, the kind of desperate repair job that says she cannot afford new ones, cannot afford anything, can barely afford to keep breathing. She clutches her ribs with one hand as if holding herself together, as if hunger is gnawing at her from the inside, and her other hand stretches toward the coffin like a drowning person reaching for shore. Her breath mists in the cold air of the cathedral, the only living warmth in a space full of the undead. She takes 3 steps forward, stumbling slightly, and when she speaks, her voice cuts through the organ's dirge like a blade through silk, raw and certain and impossible to ignore. He's not dead. 3 words. 3 impossible words. 3 words that make the vampire king's eyes snap to her face with such intensity that several nearby nobles flinch from the force of his attention. Ice blue eyes that have witnessed empires rise and fall, that have seen countless deaths and accepted them with the resignation of immortality, suddenly blaze with something other than grief. Hope. Terrible, desperate, fragile hope. Elena Marsh stands in the aisle of the Cathedral of Eternal Night, one trembling hand outstretched toward Prince Cassian's coffin, and delivers the most outrageous claim anyone has made in this sacred space in living memory. I can hear his heartbeat. Her voice shakes but holds steady underneath, the voice of someone who knows she sounds insane and refuses to care. It's faint, but it's there. 1 beat every 90 seconds. The guards move forward, hands on their blades, ready to remove this vagrant who dares desecrate a royal funeral with delusions or lies. But Aldrich Thorne raises one finger, just one, a tiny gesture that contains absolute authority, and the guards freeze mid-lunge like puppets whose strings have been cut. The vampire king stares at Elena Marsh, this impossible woman with her impossible claim, and she stares back with the peculiar defiance of someone who has been invisible for so long that being seen, even in anger, feels like a gift. She is 31 years old. She was a critical care nurse before her mother's cancer treatment generated medical debt so crushing it bent her life into shapes she never imagined possible. Before a pharmaceutical company sued her for reporting their corner cutting, their dangerous practices, their prioritization of profit over patient safety. Before the blacklist that followed, the whispered warnings that made hospitals across 3 states refuse to hire her. The bankruptcy that swallowed her apartment and her car and her future. 18 months on the streets, each day a little colder than the last, each night a little harder to survive. 2 weeks sleeping in the heating vents of this very cathedral, drawn by warmth and the bitter irony of seeking sanctuary in a vampire holy site, of finding the only kindness left in her life from the undead. She had heard the heartbeat 3 hours ago during the vigil, when nobles filed past the coffin to pay their respects, and she huddled in the shadows above, trying to stay warm. A rhythm so slow, it registered not as sound, but as vibration through the stone floor, transmitted through ancient rock like a message in Morse code. 1 beat every 90 seconds. A pattern she would recognize anywhere after 10 years in critical care. After countless shifts monitoring patients on the edge of death. After developing the particular instinct that separates good nurses from great ones. Profound hypothermia. Suspended animation. Not death. Salvageable. High Priest Morin steps forward, his crimson robes sweeping across marble worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, his face a mask of outrage barely contained by religious decorum. Blasphemy, he intones, his voice carrying the weight of ecclesiastical authority. The prince was examined by our finest physicians. Dr. Silas Vane himself declared the cause of death. This vagrant disrupts sacred rites with fantasy born of madness or malice. Elena interrupts him. meeting his glare with exhausted defiance, the kind that comes from having nothing left to lose and therefore nothing left to fear. Vampire physicians, she says, her voice steadier now, fueled by professional certainty. Who would miss a human medical condition because your kind don't get hypothermia? Your scans read metabolic shutdown as death because you've never seen a human body fight to survive at 30 degrees below normal body temperature. You've never watched a patient's metabolism slow to almost nothing, heartbeat dropping to 1 beat per minute or slower, brain activity nearly flatlined, and then come back when properly rewarmed. You wouldn't recognize it. Why would you? You're immortal. You don't freeze. The vampire king descends from his throne, each step deliberate, power radiating from him like heat from a forge. Up close he is devastating in his beauty and his age, midnight black hair silver-touched, sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, eyes that have witnessed the rise and fall of human civilizations. He wears a morning suit that cost more than Elena earned in 5 years of nursing, tailored to perfection, every stitch a testament to wealth so old it has forgotten its origins. But underneath the majesty, underneath the centuries of control, she sees something raw and human. A father's desperate prayer. "Prove it," he says, and his voice carries centuries of command, but underneath runs a current of such desperate hope it makes Elena's throat close. She approaches the coffin, aware of every eye tracking her movement, every guard's hand on their blade, every ancient vampire's barely concealed contempt. The glass is cold beneath her palm, etched with symbols she cannot read, prayers in languages dead before English was born. She presses her ear against it above where Cassian's heart should be beating, filtering out the whispers rippling through the assembled nobility, the rustling of silk and shifting of jewels, the ancient power humming through vampire veins around her like electricity through power lines. She closes her eyes and listens with every skill 10 years of critical care nursing taught her, listening past the surface to the deep rhythm underneath. There, like thunder 100 miles distant, like hope wrapped in impossible odds, like a heart that refuses to quit even when every medical instrument says it should. 90-second intervals, she whispers, opening her eyes to meet Aldrich's ice-blue stare. She sees recognition there, understanding of what it means to fight death when everyone else has surrendered, what it costs to keep hoping when hope seems like cruelty. He's hypothermic, core temperature probably below 70 degrees Fahrenheit. His metabolism crashed so low your instruments read it as flatline, but he's not dead. He's waiting. Dr. Silas Vane pushes forward through the crowd, 300 years old and silver-haired, wearing the particular arrogance of someone who has never been wrong, who has diagnosed and treated vampire nobility since before most modern medical techniques existed. Impossible, he declares, voice dripping venom and affronted pride. The prince was found in a sealed chamber, climate-controlled. This vagrant spins fantasies to earn favor or coin or attention. Elena keeps her eyes on Aldrich, speaking only to him now, father to someone who understands loss. Was there a window, she asks? An air vent. Any old ventilation shaft near where he was found. The king's jaw tightens, a muscle jumping beneath skin pale as moonlight. A gargoyle shaft, he admits. Medieval. We assumed it was sealed. Elena stands, her knees protesting the movement, joints stiff from cold and hunger and months of sleeping on concrete. You assumed wrong, she says gently, without accusation, just stating fact. If he was near that shaft when November hit, when temperatures dropped below freezing, if he was already weakened by poison or spell or drug, his body would shut down trying to survive. It's an evolutionary response in humans. Core temperature drops, metabolism slows, heartbeat becomes almost undetectable. He's not dead, Your Majesty. He's waiting for someone to bring him back. The word waiting lands in the cathedral like a bell tolling backward through time, like possibility cracking open in the middle of certainty. Aldrich's hand moves to the coffin lock with trembling fingers, the first uncontrolled movement Elena has seen from him. Ancient mechanisms click and groan, magic and metalwork combined, seals breaking with sounds like indrawn breath. "What do you need?" he asks, and the question contains entire universes of desperation. They move Prince Cassian to the cathedral's hidden preparation chamber, a surgical theater behind the altar where vampire physicians have practiced their craft for 6 centuries, where the stone walls have absorbed enough blood and magic to hum with residual power. Elena scrubs her hands with holy water and antiseptic, the familiar ritual grounding her even as the surreal vertigo of her life's pivot makes her head spin. 12 hours ago, she was invisible, homeless, slowly dying on the streets. Now she stands in a vampire surgical theater preparing to resurrect a prince. She lays out her requirements with the calm authority of a critical care nurse who has run codes in emergency rooms, who has fought death and sometimes won. Heated blankets and graduated warmth levels. Warm intravenous fluids, saline and electrolytes. Cardiac monitors capable of detecting extremely slow heartbeats. A defibrillator on standby in case they need to shock his heart back into regular rhythm. Dr. Vane provides each item with barely concealed contempt, setting equipment on steel tables like he's placing accusations, each piece a reminder that he declared this patient dead, and she dares contradict him. "If you're wrong," he says, voice dripping venom and wounded pride, "you'll have desecrated a royal corpse during state funeral rites. The penalty under vampire law is extremely specific and extremely unpleasant." "If I'm right," Elena cuts in, meeting his ancient eyes with exhausted defiance, "you failed to save your prince because you were too proud to consider human medicine. Because you've lived so long you've forgotten that humans have developed techniques you've never needed to learn." Aldrich silences them both with a look, ice-blue eyes flashing with power and impatience. He turns to Elena, and when he speaks, his voice carries the weight of centuries. "What are your terms?" he asks. Elena blinks, confused. "Terms," she repeats. "You didn't interrupt a state funeral out of charity," Aldrich says, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that feels like being read. Like every secret she's ever kept is suddenly visible. "You're not asking for gold or land, so what do you need?" Elena realizes with a start that she hadn't thought past the next 5 minutes, hadn't considered consequences or compensation, had simply heard a heartbeat everyone else missed and refused to let it stop. But something in the Vampire King's tone makes her understand that he's terrified she'll name a price he can't pay, that she'll walk away and let his son die because the cost is too high. She understands in that moment that he would give anything, pay anything, sacrifice anything to save Cassian. His throne, his blood, ancient law itself. The recognition steadies her. "Immunity," she says carefully, thinking through the implications. "From prosecution for trespassing, for desecration, for whatever laws I just violated by crashing a royal funeral. Clearing of my medical license suspension so I can practice again." And then she hesitates, hating how small it sounds next to the magnitude of what she's attempting, hating that her needs are so basic they reveal how far she's fallen. "A clean bed," she whispers. "A real meal. A chance to stop being invisible." "Done," Aldrich says immediately. No hesitation, no negotiation, the word falling like a verdict. "Save my son, and you'll have a position in the Royal Medical Corps, a suite in the palace, my protection under ancient law, the Pact of Sanctuary. No vampire, human, or other being can touch you without answering to me personally." Elena's breath catches in her throat. The Pact of Sanctuary is legend, a binding spoken only 3 times in vampire history, making the protected person as untouchable as the king's own blood, sacred and inviolate. "And if I fail," she whispers, needing to know, needing to understand what happens if Prince Cassian doesn't wake up, if his heart doesn't restart, if she's wrong about everything. Aldrich's smile is bleak and true, grief and hope tangled together in an expression that makes him look almost human. "Then we'll have matching grief," he says quietly. "And I'll owe you a debt anyway for giving me hope when I had none left, for letting me believe for even a few hours that my son might still be saved, that death might not have the final word after all." Rewarming a hypothermic patient is agony in slow motion, a medical high-wire act where every degree matters, and rushing means death just as surely as waiting too long. Elena works through the night in the cathedral's surgical theater, her hands remembering skills she thought 18 months on the streets had stolen, muscle memory rising from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. She wraps heated blankets around Prince Cassian's body in precise layers, core first because the heart and brain need warmth before the extremities, then working outward to arms and legs, each layer calibrated to raise his temperature gradually without shocking his system into cardiac arrest. Warmed intravenous saline trickles into his veins at carefully calculated intervals, fluid that will carry heat directly into his bloodstream without overwhelming his compromised cardiovascular system. She monitors his core temperature with a rectal thermometer because it gives the most accurate reading, watching the digital display climb with glacial patience that tests every ounce of her professional discipline. 71.3 degrees Fahrenheit, 71.8, 72.4. Each tenth of a degree is a small victory, a step back from the edge of death. But the progress feels impossibly slow, and her hands shake from exhaustion and adrenaline, and the weight of understanding that if she miscalculates even slightly, the vampire prince will die, and his father's grief will turn to rage. Aldrich Thorne never leaves his position at his son's head, one hand resting on the edge of the surgical table, as if anchoring himself to reality, ice-blue eyes tracking every monitor spike, every shallow breath Elena coaxes from Cassian's lungs. He stands utterly still in that way only vampires can manage, motionless as carved stone except for his eyes, which blaze with desperate attention, watching his son's chest rise and fall with a rhythm so faint it barely qualifies as breathing. Dr. Silas Vane hovers nearby, 300 years of medical expertise making him unable to simply leave, even though his pride is wounded, even though every moment he remains is an admission that this human vagrant knows something he missed. He maintains skeptical silence, but occasionally hands Elena equipment before she asks for it, anticipating her needs with the instinct of a truly gifted physician, and this small gesture of professional respect costs him more than Elena can fully appreciate. Around hour 3, when her hands are shaking so badly she has to pause and breathe through the tremors, when exhaustion threatens to blur her focus and she needs something to anchor her attention, Elena speaks into the quiet punctuated only by the beep of monitors and the hiss of the IV drip. "Tell me about him," she says, glancing at Aldrich. "It helps sometimes, talking to coma patients. They can hear, even when they can't respond. The words reach through whatever they're experiencing and give them something to hold on to, a thread leading back to consciousness." Aldrich's expression shifts microscopically, grief softening into something almost tender, and when he speaks, his voice carries a weight of memory that spans centuries. "Cassian was born during a solar eclipse," he says, the words precise as if he's examined them countless times in private. Half human, half vampire. His mother was mortal, a doctor actually, one of the first human physicians allowed to practice in vampire territories during the plague outbreak of 1802. "She saved my life when I contracted a blood disease that should have killed me, used antibiotics and transfusion techniques our physicians had never considered. I fell in love with her brilliance before I fell in love with her beauty." He pauses, and Elena sees the naked grief on his face, unguarded for just a moment. "She died bringing Cassian into the world," he continues, voice rougher now. "Childbirth complications that even her medical knowledge couldn't prevent. She made me promise to raise him to believe in peace between our peoples, to honor both halves of his heritage, to prove that human and vampire could create something beautiful together instead of only destroying each other. Cassian inherited my strength, my longevity, my political position. But he inherited her heart, her belief that medicine and diplomacy can solve problems that warfare only perpetuates. He was negotiating a new treaty when this happened, working to establish shared governance and interspecies protections, trying to fulfill his mother's vision. When someone tried to kill him, Elena finishes quietly, understanding clicking into place like puzzle pieces finding their positions. Their eyes meet over Cassian's still form, and the recognition passing between them needs no words. "Yes," Aldrich says, and his voice drops into registers that promise violence, ancient and absolute. "And when I find who did this, when I discover which member of my court valued war over my son's life, they will learn what true death means. They will beg for the mercy of simple execution before I'm finished." Elena should probably be frightened by the naked threat in his tone, but instead, she feels oddly comforted. This is a father's rage, protective and pure, and she understands it completely. The night stretches on with agonizing slowness, each hour marked by incremental temperature increases and careful monitoring of vital signs that gradually strengthen. Cassian's heartbeat climbs from one beat every 90 seconds to one every 45 seconds, then one every 20 seconds, his body slowly remembering how to sustain life at normal human metabolic rates. His breathing deepens from barely perceptible to shallow but regular, and faint color begins to return to his face, replacing the corpse-pale stillness with something that looks almost alive. Elena adjusts warming protocols, increases IV flow rates, watches cardiac rhythms normalize on the monitors with the focused intensity of someone who knows that one mistake, one moment of inattention, could undo hours of careful work. Dr. Vane offers quiet observations occasionally, pointing out subtle changes in Cassian's condition that Elena might have missed, and gradually the tension between them eases into something resembling collaborative respect. At 4:47 in the morning, according to the ancient clock mounted on the surgical theater wall, Cassian's core temperature hits 89 degrees Fahrenheit. Elena disconnects the warming blankets and steps back from the table, her legs trembling from hours of standing, her back aching from bending over the patient, her hands finally still now that the critical intervention phase is complete. "Now we wait," she whispers, and her voice sounds strange in the quiet, hoarse from disuse. His body has to decide now whether to keep fighting or surrender. We've given him every advantage, warmed him carefully, supported his cardiovascular system, but ultimately he has to choose life. The Vampire King leans forward over his son, hope and dread warring on his ancient face, making him look almost human in his vulnerability. For 17 minutes, nothing changes except the steady beep of the cardiac monitor and the quiet hiss of oxygen flowing through nasal cannula into Cassian's lungs. Elena counts each minute, watching the clock, watching the prince's face, looking for any sign of consciousness returning or failing to return. Dr. Vane stands motionless, professional mask firmly in place, but eyes betraying his intense focus. Aldrich doesn't breathe, doesn't blink, just stares at his son with such concentrated intensity that the air around him seems to shimmer with barely contained power. Then at 5:04 in the morning, Cassian gasps. The sound is sharp and desperate, like someone surfacing from deep water after too long submerged, like drowning in reverse. His chest heaves, pulling in air with sudden fierce hunger, and his eyes fly open so fast it's almost violent. Silver-gray irises like storm clouds, wide with confusion and terror, and the particular disorientation of someone who doesn't know where they are or how they got there. He tries to sit up, muscles jerking with uncoordinated strength, and Aldrich's hands land on his shoulders with gentle firmness, pressing him back down to the table with a father's instinctive protection. "Easy," the Vampire King says, and his voice breaks on the word, centuries of control shattering under the weight of relief. "Easy, my son. You're safe. You're in the cathedral surgical theater. You've been hypothermic, but you're warming now. You're going to be fine. But Cassian's gaze doesn't stay on his father, instead finding Elena where she stands exhausted and bedraggled at the foot of the surgical table, still wearing her threadbare coat over borrowed surgical scrubs, her matted auburn hair pulled back in a hasty attempt at hygiene. His silver-gray eyes lock onto hers with startling intensity, and when he speaks, his voice rasps like he's forgotten how to use it. "You," he says, the single word carrying weight beyond its simplicity. "I heard you. In the dark. When I was trapped in the cold, when everything was shutting down and I couldn't find my way back. I heard your heartbeat. Steady, human, alive. I followed it back." Elena's throat closes around words she can't form, emotion overwhelming her tired defenses, and she can only nod because speaking seems impossible. Dr. Vane moves in with post-resuscitation protocols, checking pupil response and grip strength and neurological function with the brisk efficiency of centuries of practice. But Cassian's hand shoots out with surprising strength and grips his father's wrist hard enough that Aldrich flinches slightly. "The treaty," Cassian gasps, urgency cutting through his weakness. "Father, listen. They poisoned me. Counselor Thane arranged it. He wants war with the human settlements, wants to use my death as justification for breaking the peace talks. The document proving his involvement is hidden in my chambers, sealed behind the third bookshelf in a compartment only I know about. You have to find it before he destroys the evidence." Aldrich's face goes absolutely still, rage and grief and deadly focus combining into something terrifying. "We'll handle it," he says, but his voice promises violence. "Rest now, Cassian. You're safe, and I will deal with Thane." But Cassian won't let go of his father's wrist, won't stop talking even though each word clearly costs him effort. "He'll try again," the prince insists, his eyes finding Elena's once more. "He'll come for her, the human who saved me. If I live, his plan fails. She's evidence, a witness, proof that someone intervened. They'll kill her to erase what she knows, to eliminate the obstacle she represents. You have to protect her." The words land in Elena's chest like a physical blow, understanding crashing over her in cold waves. She interrupted a funeral that was supposed to ignite human-vampire tensions, saved a prince whose death was meant to justify war, became a living symbol of cooperation between species that some faction desperately wants to prevent. She's not just a vagrant who got lucky anymore. She's a target. Aldrich understands before Elena fully processes the implications, his ancient mind already several moves ahead in whatever deadly political game is unfolding. "The pact," Cassian breathes, his grip on his father's wrist, loosening as exhaustion pulls at him. "Father, you have to invoke the full pact of sanctuary, not just the promise, the blood binding. Before word spreads that I'm alive, before Thane's allies learn that their plan failed." "I already offered it," Aldrich says, turning to Elena with an expression that mixes determination and something that looks almost like fear, but not for himself, for her. "But we must formalize it immediately, complete the ritual binding before dawn breaks, and the cathedral guards change shifts and information starts flowing through channels we can't control." Elena barely understands what's happening, still processing the revelation that she's somehow become entangled in vampire political conspiracy, when Aldrich lifts her right hand with careful formality and produces a ceremonial dagger from inside his coat. The blade is obsidian and silver, etched with runes that seem to move in the candlelight like living things, ancient symbols that predate written language. "The pact of sanctuary requires blood," Aldrich explains, his voice taking on ritual cadence. "Yours and mine, mixed and spoken over with the old words. It will bind you to my protection for as long as you live. No one, vampire or human or witch or any other being, can harm you without declaring war on my entire bloodline, without challenging the throne itself." Any threat to you becomes a threat to me personally, and I will respond with the full force of my position and power. It's also permanent, Dr. Vane adds quietly, stepping forward with a warning that sounds almost kind despite his earlier contempt. You'll be tied to the vampire court forever, Miss Marsh, bound into our political structures, our alliances and rivalries, our blood debts and ancient obligations. You'll know secrets that humans aren't meant to know, be part of intrigues that span centuries. You can't unknow what you've learned here tonight, can't step back from what you're about to become. There's no returning to your old life, such as it was. Elena looks at Cassian, still pale but breathing steadily now, alive because she crashed a funeral and refused to let death win when everyone else had accepted it. She thinks of the heartbeat she heard when everyone else heard silence. The choice she made to speak up when staying quiet would have been safer. The moment when invisibility ended and consequence began. She thinks of the streets she's been sleeping on for 18 months, the cold and hunger and slow erosion of self that comes from being treated like she doesn't exist. She thinks of the choice between that invisible death and this visible dangerous life, where at least someone sees her, where her existence matters enough that people might kill her for it. Do it, she says, and her voice is steady despite everything. Aldrich cuts his palm with the ceremonial dagger, blood welling dark against his pale skin, ancient vampire blood that carries centuries of power. Then he cuts Elena's palm, and her blood is bright human red, warm and mortal. He presses their hands together, blood mingling and running together into a silver chalice that Dr. Vane produces from a locked cabinet, mixing into something that looks almost black in the candlelight. The Vampire King speaks in a language older than English, words that taste of copper and ash and binding magic, each syllable resonating through Elena's bones like she's become a tuning fork vibrating to frequencies she never knew existed. The air thickens around them, pressure building until her ears pop, and she feels something fundamental shift in her relationship to reality, like the universe itself is taking note of this promise and holding all parties accountable. When Aldrich finishes the incantation, the wound on Elena's palm seals instantly with a flash of silver light, healing in seconds and leaving behind a scar in the perfect shape of a crown, raised and permanent and glowing faintly. It's done, Aldrich says, and his voice carries finality. You are sanctuary-bound, Elena Marsh, my protection, my responsibility, my ward under ancient law. What neither of them sees is the figure watching from the shadows of the cathedral's upper gallery, where stone arches create pockets of darkness even candlelight cannot penetrate. Counselor Thane, ancient and cunning, his silver hair gleaming faintly as he observes the ritual below with cold calculation. He had come to ensure the funeral proceeded as planned, to observe the grief that would justify his carefully constructed war. Instead, he watches his carefully laid plans unravel in the hands of a homeless human woman and a half-breed prince who should be dead. His expression never changes, perfectly controlled after centuries of political maneuvering, but his mind is already racing ahead to contingencies and alternatives, to new strategies for eliminating obstacles and achieving goals. The girl is sanctuary-bound now, protected by blood magic and royal decree, but protection only works if the protector survives, and Aldrich Thorne has ruled long enough that succession is overdue. Thane watches the Vampire King bind himself to a mortal vagrant, watches Cassian grip his father's hand with returning strength, watches Dr. Vane carefully document the proceedings as if they're legitimate instead of the farce they represent. He watches, and he plans, and he disappears back into shadow before anyone notices he was ever there. Elena wakes disoriented in darkness that feels wrong, too soft, too warm, and for a long moment she thinks she's still on the streets, and this is hypothermia-induced hallucination, the kind that makes freezing people think they're comfortable right before they die. Then her eyes adjust and she realizes the darkness is just heavy curtains blocking morning light, and she's lying in a bed so soft it feels like floating, surrounded by silk sheets that whisper against her skin, with a quality she hasn't experienced since before the bankruptcy, before the blacklisting, before 18 months of sleeping on concrete and cardboard. A fireplace crackles with real wood in the corner of the room, not the trash barrel fires she's huddled around for warmth, but an actual stone hearth with carved mantelpiece and brass tools, flames dancing over split logs that smell like cedar and pine. She sits up slowly, muscles aching from yesterday's marathon of standing over Cassian's surgical table, and stares at floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook a view she's only ever seen from alleys and underpasses, and the desperate hidden spaces between buildings. The vampire district of Ashenmoor spreads below her in the gray November morning, Gothic spires piercing low clouds like dark fingers reaching toward heaven, cobblestone streets running between buildings that predate modern architecture by centuries. The whole district saturated with old magic that makes the air shimmer faintly even in daylight. She's in the palace, she realizes with a jolt. Not the cathedral surgical theater, but actual royal quarters, given a room with a view that probably costs more per night than she earned in a month before losing everything. A knock at the door makes her flinch, street instincts flaring even in this protected space. A young vampire woman enters without waiting for permission, moving with the fluid grace that marks her species, maybe 19 in appearance, but carrying herself with the confidence of someone much older. She has kind eyes, dark and warm, and wears an interesting combination of designer dress and messenger bag slung across her body, like she's perpetually running errands between two different worlds. "Miss Marsh," the vampire says, smiling with genuine warmth. "I'm Mira, assigned as your attendant while you're staying in the palace. His Majesty requests your presence at breakfast in the sunroom when you're ready, but there's no rush." She sets down a neatly folded stack of clothes on a chair near the fireplace, then adds almost casually, "Oh, and Dr. Vane sent these over this morning." She produces an official-looking envelope from her messenger bag and hands it to Elena, who takes it with trembling hands. Elena opens the envelope with fingers that won't stay steady, pulls out heavyweight paper embossed with the seal of the Ashenmoor Medical Board, and reads words that punch through her chest like electricity. Medical license fully reinstated, all previous sanctions and blacklisting removed, credentials restored without conditions. Authorized to practice in all facilities within Ashenmoor jurisdiction and affiliated territories, signed by the board chairman and countersigned by King Aldrich Thorne himself, as witness to her professional competence. Her name, printed in formal typeface. Dr. Elena Marsh, critical care specialist. Her credentials that she thought were destroyed forever, suddenly returned like someone reached into the past and erased the bankruptcy and false accusations and systematic destruction of her career. Tears blur the text, and she blinks them away furiously, not wanting to cry in front of this vampire girl who's watching her with sympathetic understanding. "Thank you," Elena manages, voice rough. Mira just nods like she understands what this means. Which maybe she does after 70 years of watching humans struggle and lose, and sometimes get small pieces of themselves back. The clothes Mira brought are perfect, tailored to Elena's measurements, like someone took precise notes while she was sleeping. Dark slacks that actually fit her hips, instead of hanging loose from weight loss. A burgundy blouse in soft material that feels expensive against her skin. Low boots with good support that are broken in enough to be comfortable, but clean enough to be presentable. Everything in her size, everything chosen with thought for both formality and comfort, and Elena tries not to think about how they got her measurements or how much these clothes probably cost. She dresses quickly, autopilot taking over while her mind processes the strangeness of her situation, and follows Mira through palace corridors that smell of old stone and power so concentrated it makes her teeth ache slightly. The hallways are wider than any modern building needs, ceilings vaulted high above their heads, lit by a combination of electric lights designed to look like torches and actual candles in wall sconces that drip wax onto stone floors, polished smooth by centuries of foot traffic. Portraits watch from gilded frames along the walls, formal paintings of Aldrich's bloodline stretching back through time, and Elena recognizes the Vampire King's face in paintings dated to the 1500s, completely unchanged. The same ice-blue eyes and angular features staring out from Renaissance-era clothing and medieval armor and Victorian formal wear, unchanged and unchanging across 5 centuries. And Elena feels the weight of immortality pressing down on her from all sides, making her feel impossibly small and temporary. Breakfast takes place in a sunroom, which strikes Elena as deeply ironic given that heavy curtains block every window against the morning light that would burn the room's vampire occupants. The space is beautiful despite the darkness, all white stone and trailing plants that somehow thrive without direct sunlight, filled with furniture that manages to look both ancient and comfortable. A long table dominates the center of the room, laden with food that makes Elena's mouth water after months of soup kitchen meals and dumpster finds. Fresh fruit and pastries, eggs prepared 3 different ways, bread still warm from ovens, coffee that smells like actual imported beans instead of the burnt dregs she's been drinking. Also goblets filled with dark liquid she deliberately doesn't look at too closely, placed at several seats around the table. Aldrich sits at the head of the table and stands when she enters, a gesture of respect so unexpected it makes Elena freeze in the doorway. The Vampire King wearing casual clothes instead of his formal funeral attire, looking somehow more dangerous in simple dark shirt and slacks, because the absence of ceremony makes his power more obvious rather than less. "Please, sit," he says, gesturing to a chair across from where Cassian sits to his right. The prince looks remarkably recovered considering he was clinically dead 36 hours ago, wearing jeans and a sweater that make him seem younger and more human than the pale corpse she rewarmed degree by painstaking degree. His silver-gray eyes track Elena's movement as she sits, and when he speaks his voice carries warmth that seems genuine instead of political. "I owe you my life," Cassian says simply, leaning forward slightly. "Thank you, Dr. Marsh." "You already thanked me," Elena responds, uncomfortable with gratitude from royalty, from anyone really after 18 months of being treated like she's invisible and worthless. "When you woke up in the surgical theater, you said you heard my heartbeat." "I did," Cassian says, and his eyes go distant, like he's remembering something profound. "I was trapped in the cold, drowning in it. Everything shutting down, thoughts scattering, like being pulled underwater into darkness that had no bottom. But I heard this rhythm cutting through the numbness, steady and human and alive. A heartbeat that didn't belong in that frozen space. I followed it back to consciousness, used it like a rope pulling me up from the depths. You were my lighthouse in the dark." The metaphor lands soft and intimate between them, and Elena looks away first, discomforted by the intensity in his gaze. Aldrich clears his throat, breaking the moment with deliberate timing that suggests he notices the connection forming between his son and the human doctor. "We have a problem," the Vampire King says, voice dropping into business mode. "Councillor Thane has called for an emergency session of the High Council this afternoon, scheduled for 2 hours past noon. He's demanding an official explanation for the interrupted funeral and questioning the legitimacy of Cassian's resurrection. His formal complaint claims the revival violates natural law and threatens the sacred order of vampire society." "He's claiming I'm an abomination," Cassian corrects quietly, bitterness threading through his tone. "That my survival proves half-breeds shouldn't exist. That my mother's choice to bear a Dampier child was an affront to vampire purity. That allowing me to live undermines the fundamental separation between species that keeps our world stable." It's the same argument he's been making for 50 years, just with new excuse attached. Elena's jaw tightens with anger she doesn't bother hiding. "That's racist garbage designed to—" "Politics," Aldrich finishes, but his eyes flash agreement with her unspoken condemnation. "Thane wants war with the human settlements outside Ashenmoor, has wanted it for decades." He believes vampires should rule absolutely instead of negotiating peace treaties and shared governance. Cassian's treaty would have prevented that war, established legal protections for humans, and created joint councils for dispute resolution. His death would have been blamed on human extremists, giving Thane the political pretext he needs to declare martial law and launch military campaigns against the settlements. Public grief over a murdered prince would have united vampire factions that normally oppose aggression, created momentum that even I couldn't have stopped without looking weak. So now he'll discredit the resurrection, Elena says, understanding clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Make Cassian seem unreliable or unstable, make me seem like a charlatan or a witch who deceived everyone. Undermine the treaty before it's even signed by destroying the prince's credibility and questioning his judgment. If he can make the council doubt Cassian's fitness to negotiate, the treaty dies regardless of whether Cassian lives. Precisely, Aldrich says, and his smile is grim with the expression of someone who's played political games for centuries and recognizes the moves his opponents make. Which is why you'll attend the council session this afternoon, Dr. Marsh, as my personal guest, under formal sanctuary protection. Your presence will force Thane to make his accusations publicly instead of through backroom whispers, and public accusations can be publicly refuted. Elena swallows hard, suddenly understanding that breakfast isn't just hospitality, but preparation for walking into a room full of ancient vampires who may see her as either valuable witness or convenient scapegoat, depending on which serves their political interests better. The High Council meets in a circular chamber deep beneath the palace, carved from bedrock that predates the city above it, accessed through a spiral staircase that descends so far. Elena's ears pop from pressure changes. Stone walls are carved with the entire history of vampire civilization rendered in relief sculptures, beginning with origin myths at the top near the entrance, and spiraling downward through millennia of wars and treaties and cultural evolution. The domed ceiling high above their heads is inlaid with constellations that move in real time, stars shifting across black stone sky in patterns that track actual astronomical positions, achieved through some combination of magic and mechanics Elena can't begin to understand. 13 seats arranged in a circle around a central floor where petitioners stand, each seat carved from single blocks of stone and marked with the sigil of the bloodline it represents. Elena enters beside Aldrich, acutely aware of Cassian walking close behind her, and feels every pair of ancient eyes in the chamber track her movement with the focused attention predators give to unfamiliar creatures entering their territory. The council members range in apparent age from 20-something to elderly, but all carry themselves with the weight of centuries, immortality making them patient and calculating in ways humans can never match. Councillor Thane sits directly across from the king's empty seat, positioned for maximum visual confrontation, tall and silver-haired with aristocratic features and the kind of smile that predators wear right before striking. He wears formal robes that make Aldrich's casual authority seem almost disrespectful by contrast, playing the role of concerned statesman worried about proper protocol. Your Majesty, Thane says, rising and bowing with elaborate courtesy that barely conceals contempt. We are deeply relieved to see Prince Cassian recovered from his unfortunate condition, though we must question the highly irregular circumstances surrounding his revival. A homeless human interrupts sacred funeral rites, claims medical knowledge that our own court physicians apparently lack, and conveniently manages to save the prince when 300 years of vampire medical expertise declared him beyond help? Forgive my suspicion, but it reeks of staged theater, of political manipulation designed to achieve some hidden agenda we have not yet identified. Murmurs ripple through the council chamber, half the members nodding thoughtful agreement, while others watch Aldrich to see how he'll respond to the challenge. Aldrich remains standing, doesn't take his seat, because sitting would suggest he's accepting Thane's framing of the situation as legitimate debate rather than transparent political attack. Dr. Elena Marsh is a licensed critical care specialist with credentials now fully reinstated by our medical board. The Vampire King says, voice carrying absolute authority that fills the circular chamber. She identified hypothermia that our physicians missed because vampire physiology runs cold naturally, and our medical tradition has never developed protocols for treating temperature-related death in vampire patients who maintain partial human metabolism. She applied human emergency medicine techniques that saved my son's life when our methods had already failed. I have granted her formal sanctuary under blood oath in recognition of this service, binding her to my protection under the oldest laws of our civilization. The chamber goes absolutely silent, the kind of shocked quiet that follows truly unprecedented announcements. Sanctuary bonds haven't been invoked in over 200 years. Not since the last great war between vampire houses, when rival kings offered protection to each other's defectors. Sanctuary, Thane repeats softly, letting the word hang in the air like an accusation. For a human who conveniently appeared at the perfect moment to interrupt funeral rites and rescue a prince our own physicians had declared dead? Your Majesty, with the greatest respect, I must suggest a more likely scenario that explains these convenient coincidences. This woman was part of the original plot to poison your son, participated in the assassination attempt from the beginning. She administered the poison or facilitated its delivery, then deliberately saved Prince Cassian at the last possible moment to gain your trust and gratitude, infiltrate the palace through your emotional vulnerability, and position herself to sabotage the peace treaty from within our own court. It's a classic intelligence operation, exactly the kind of long-game strategy the human resistance employs. Elena's blood runs cold, shock and fury warring in her chest because the accusation is so absurd and yet so carefully constructed to explain away every piece of evidence that proves her innocent. That's completely absurd, Cassian says, standing abruptly enough that his chair scrapes against stone. She had no motive, no prior contact with anyone in the court, no opportunity to, didn't she? Thane interrupts smoothly, producing a leather folder from beneath his robes. He opens it and begins reading with the tone of prosecutor presenting damning evidence. Elena Marsh, 42 years old, formerly employed as critical care specialist at Ashenmore General Hospital until her bankruptcy 3 years ago due to medical debt from her daughter's cancer treatment. Blacklisted from hospital nursing after refusing to participate in fraudulent billing practices, which she framed as whistleblowing, but which investigation revealed was actually cover for her own theft of medications. Desperate for money and social position, politically vulnerable, exactly the profile that human resistance recruiters target for infiltration operations. He slides photographs across the stone floor toward the center of the chamber, glossy prints that skitter to a stop where everyone can see them. Images of Elena from weeks ago, accepting a sandwich from a man wearing a resistance armband outside a soup kitchen, the two of them appearing to have an extended conversation. I was hungry, Elena says, voice shaking with fury that she barely controls. That man handed me food at a charity kitchen. I ate it. I didn't join a resistance movement or receive instructions for espionage. I was homeless and starving, and someone offered me a sandwich. That's not conspiracy, that's basic human survival. Or, Thane counters with poisonous reasonableness, you were receiving final instructions before executing your infiltration plan. The timing is remarkably convenient, Miss Marsh. 3 weeks ago you received this sandwich and have this conversation. 2 weeks ago you're observed sleeping in cathedral heating vents. 1 week ago you're seen near palace service entrances. Yesterday you interrupt a royal funeral at precisely the right moment to save a prince you claim to have diagnosed by hearing a heartbeat no one else could detect. This is either the most unlikely series of coincidences in history, or it's a carefully orchestrated operation. Aldrich's rage fills the chamber like a physical force, power radiating from him in waves that make the air pressure increase until Elena's ears hurt. Counselor Thane, you overstep your authority and insult my judgment, the Vampire King says, voice dropping into registers that promise violence. Elena Marsh saved my son's life. Your accusations are baseless political theater designed to... Based on extensive evidence, Thane interrupts with smooth confidence, compiled over 3 weeks of investigation. Miss Marsh has been seen near the palace and cathedral multiple times before the funeral, far more frequently than random chance would explain. Sleeping in cathedral heating vents that provide view of the royal wing. Observing guard rotation schedules from positions that suggest surveillance rather than mere shelter-seeking. Accepting food and instructions from known resistance operatives. Maintaining connection to medical networks despite her supposed homelessness. All behaviors entirely consistent with intelligence-gathering operations, not the desperate survival activities she claims. He's twisting everything, Elena realizes with sick horror. Her desperation, her homelessness, her simple human need for warmth and shelter, all reframed as espionage. Her medical background that she couldn't erase even when sleeping on streets, reinterpreted as evidence of ongoing professional connections, instead of just skills she couldn't forget. Every choice she made to survive now used as proof of conspiracy. Cassian stands abruptly, anger making his Dampier nature more visible as his eyes flash with inherited vampire intensity. Then let me provide counter-evidence. Counselor Thane, where were you the night I was poisoned? The night someone added nightshade derivative to my dinner wine in concentrations designed to induce hypothermia in Dampier physiology without triggering immediate symptoms that would have brought help before the damage became fatal? Thane's smile doesn't falter even slightly, expression remaining perfectly controlled. In my estate on the northern edge of the district, hosting a dinner party for the trade guild representatives, 12 witnesses can confirm my presence throughout the entire evening, Your Highness. I was nowhere near your chambers or the kitchens when the poisoning occurred. Vampire witnesses, Cassian says with heavy emphasis. Who answer to you politically? Who owe you favors and allegiances? Whose testimony is worthless because you've had centuries to build networks of obligation? Father, the proof I mentioned when I woke is in my chambers, sealed behind the third bookshelf in the hidden compartment only I know about. Documents proving Thane's involvement in the assassination plot, correspondence between him and extremist factions. We need to retrieve them immediately. Your chambers have been sealed during your funeral preparations, Thane says, and his tone carries just the right note of procedural concern, and subsequently searched by palace security for evidence related to the assassination attempt, per standard protocol. We found nothing suggesting my involvement or anyone else's beyond the single corrupted servant who administered the poison and who conveniently died by suicide before interrogation could reveal his employers. Very convenient, Cassian says bitterly. Because you removed the evidence after poisoning me, cleaned up your conspiracy before I could expose it. This is getting us nowhere, Aldrich says, cutting through the argument with royal authority. He turns to address the full council, making this about their judgment rather than Thane's accusations. I call for a right of truth under the old laws. Dr. Marsh will submit to formal questioning under blood oath, speaking truth that cannot be deceived or hidden. If she's lying about anything, we'll all know immediately, and I will revoke sanctuary myself. If she's innocent as I believe, these accusations end permanently, and Counselor Thane will formally apologize for impugning my judgment and my guest's honor. The council members exchange glances, the proposal clearly unexpected but difficult to refuse. The right of truth is ancient magic, binding and absolute, impossible to deceive because the vampire blood forces truthfulness at neurological level. I accept, Elena says before anyone can object, or before she fully thinks through what she's agreeing to. Her voice rings clear in the chamber despite her terror, because she knows she's innocent, and knows that proving it publicly is her only chance to survive whatever political game is being played around her. Thane's eyes narrow microscopically, the first crack in his perfect control, and for a moment, Elena thinks he'll object, or find some procedural reason to refuse. Then his smile returns, sharper than before. "As do I," the counselor says smoothly. "Let truth be revealed, and let us all accept whatever is discovered." What Elena doesn't know yet, what no one bothers to explain before she agrees, is that the rite of truth requires drinking vampire blood directly from the vein. And once you've tasted it, once vampire blood enters your system and creates that connection, it never fully severs, binding you to vampire society in ways that go far beyond legal protection or political alliance. The rite of truth is conducted at midnight in the Palace Blood Chapel, a room Elena immediately hates with visceral intensity that goes beyond aesthetics into pure instinctive revulsion. The walls are dark crimson stone that looks like congealed blood in the flickering light from candles set in iron sconces, each flame casting shadows that move wrong, too slow and too deliberate to be natural firelight. The floor is inlaid with silver channels forming concentric circles that spiral inward toward the center point, metal catching light in patterns that hurt to look at directly, geometry that seems to shift slightly when viewed from peripheral vision. At the center sits a basin carved from a single massive ruby, dark red and translucent, large enough to hold maybe 2 gallons of liquid, its surface carved with symbols in a language Elena does not recognize and suspects predates human writing entirely. High Priest Morin officiates the ceremony, joined by 3 Elder Council members serving as official witnesses, their combined age probably exceeding 2,000 years, based on the weight of power that radiates from them, like heat from banked coals. Aldrich stands at the circle's outer edge, wearing formal robes that make him look more king than Elena has seen before, authority radiating from every line of his posture. Cassian stands to his father's left, gray eyes fixed on Elena with concern he does not bother hiding. Thane positions himself opposite the king, separated by the ritual space, expression arranged in perfect concern that does not quite reach his ancient eyes. Dr. Vane stands slightly apart from the official witnesses, medical bag at his feet, present in some capacity Elena does not fully understand, but appreciates nonetheless. Elena kneels at the center of the concentric silver circles, trying very hard not to shake visibly, trying to project confidence she absolutely does not feel while surrounded by vampires older than most nations, and magic she has no framework to comprehend. Morin steps forward, voice dropping into formal cadences that echo strangely in the crimson chamber, words carrying weight beyond their literal meaning. The rite binds truth speaker to truth seeker through blood connection, he explains in tones suggesting he has performed this ceremony before, though perhaps not for centuries. Lies burn the speaker from within, causing pain proportional to the deception's magnitude. Truths resonate through the blood bond, creating harmonic feedback that all witnesses can perceive as light and vibration in the silver channels. There is no deception possible under the rite, no evasion that does not carry cost, no half-truth that will not be recognized as such by those who know how to read the signs. Do you consent to this binding, Elena Marsh, understanding that refusal will be interpreted as admission of guilt? I consent, Elena says, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. And you, Counselor Thane, as formal accuser and truth seeker? I consent, Thane responds with perfect composure, as though this is merely administrative procedure rather than ancient magic about to expose conspiracies that have festered for decades. Morin produces a ceremonial dagger different from the sanctuary blade, older by perhaps millennia, the metal black as midnight, and decorated with silver wire wrapped around the handle in patterns that match the floor channels. He approaches Elena first, taking her left hand since the sanctuary scar marks her right palm, turning it upward to expose the vulnerable skin. The blade is cold enough to burn as it cuts, precise slice across her palm that wells immediately with blood darker than it should be in the candlelight. Morin positions her hand above the ruby basin, letting blood drip into its carved depths, perhaps 20 drops before the flow slows. Then Thane steps forward, extending his hand without hesitation or visible concern, allowing the priest to cut his palm with the same blade, now carrying Elena's blood on its edge. Vampire blood joins human blood in the basin, mixing with audible hiss, like water hitting hot metal, steam rising in patterns that form symbols Elena almost recognizes before they dissipate. The mixture begins to glow from within. Deep red light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, and Elena feels something cold and ancient and utterly inhuman wrap around her heart, like fingers made of ice and obligation, the rite taking hold at cellular level, rewriting her nervous system temporarily, to make deception physically impossible. Moren begins chanting in the old language, words that sound like thunder compressed into syllables, like glaciers grinding stone into powder over millennia, like the first darkness before stars existed. The silver channels in the floor begin to glow in response to his voice, light spreading outward from the ruby basin in waves that follow the spiral pattern, brightening with each repetition of the chant until the entire floor blazes with cold white light that reflects off crimson walls and turns the chapel into something from nightmare or dream. Elena feels the rite settle fully into place, feels her autonomy drain away in specific limited fashion, leaving her capable of action and thought, but absolutely incapable of deliberate falsehood while the binding holds. "Speak your questions," Morin says to Thane, stepping back from the center to allow accuser and accused to face each other across glowing channels. Thane steps forward with predator's grace, eyes glittering with confidence, and something darker, triumph perhaps, or vindication anticipated. "Elena Marsh, did you poison Prince Cassian with nightshade derivative or any other substance intended to cause his death?" "No," Elena says. The word coming easily and cleanly, truth flowing through her without resistance. The channels glow brighter in immediate response, light pulsing once strongly then settling to steady illumination, truth acknowledged and accepted by the ancient magic. "Have you conspired with human resistance movements to harm the vampire court or undermine its political stability?" "No," Elena says again, feeling the same clean flow of truth, the same affirmation from the right. The light pulses agreement, steady and sure, no flicker or hesitation to suggest evasion. Thane's jaw tightens microscopically, first visible crack in his perfect composure, but he continues with same smooth confidence. "Have you entered the palace under false pretenses, or with intention to deceive the royal family?" "No," Elena responds. "I entered the cathedral to save a life, Benet. I had no pretenses, false or otherwise. I was homeless and heard someone dying and used skills I possessed to help." The truth resonates through the blood bond so strongly, Elena feels it in her teeth. Vibration that travels up from the glowing floor channels into her bones. She watches Thane's strategy crumbling in real time, watches him search for questions that might reveal guilt that does not exist, and feels grim satisfaction despite her fear. But Thane has clearly prepared for this possibility, has questions designed not to prove conspiracy, but to undermine her credibility in other ways. "Did you know Prince Cassian was half human before you began treating him?" Elena hesitates fractionally, parsing the question carefully because the right compels truth, but truth has nuance. "No, I did not know his heritage when I started treatment. I recognized Dampier physiology during examination, but initially I just knew he was dying and needed help." The light flickers slightly, glowing steady, but with faint oscillation. Truth, but incomplete truth. Answer that holds back context. Thane pounces on the flicker like shark scenting blood in water. "Did you develop feelings for the prince during his resurrection? Feelings beyond professional medical concern?" The right compels honesty at neurological level, dragging response from Elena before conscious mind can construct careful evasion. Her face flushes hot despite the cold magic wrapped around her heart. "He was my patient," Elena says, trying to frame truth in professional terms. "I focused on saving his life. That was my only concern during treatment. The light dims noticeably, not lie exactly, but evasion clear to anyone watching. Truth incomplete or framed to hide emotional reality. Did you? Thane presses with voice sharp as his ceremonial blade. In the hours spent alone with the unconscious prince, touch him in ways beyond strict medical necessity? That is enough, Aldrich snarls from the circle's edge, anger making his power radiate in waves that press against Elena's skin. But the rite is bound and activated, magic following its own rules regardless of royal displeasure, and Elena must answer the question asked or suffer burning pain of refused truth. I held his hand, Elena whispers, shame and defiance mixing in her voice. Once, for approximately 30 seconds. When his core temperature spiked during rewarming, and I thought he might seize from the rapid change, I needed to ground him, to let him know through touch that he was not alone in the dark. It was comfort, not romantic gesture. It was medicine. The light blazes brilliant white, so bright Elena has to close her eyes against the glare, pure truth acknowledged with intensity that makes the ruby basin ring like struck bell. The sound fills the chapel, resonates in Elena's chest, carries absolute certainty that leaves no room for doubt or reinterpretation. Cassian's expression softens visibly, something like wonder crossing his face, and Elena cannot look at him directly. Thane looks furious for the first time, composure cracking to reveal the rage beneath his aristocratic mask. My turn, Elena says suddenly, surprising herself as much as everyone watching. The words come from some deep place of anger and injustice, from 18 months of being accused and dismissed and treated like her truth does not matter. Morin blinks in visible surprise, ancient eyes widening fractionally. The right allows the accused to question the accuser under the same binding, he says slowly. It is rarely invoked, most people do not know the provision exists, but the law is clear and the magic will support it if you formally request reversal. I invoke it, Elena says, standing despite the protocol that probably requires her to remain kneeling. The blood connection thrums between her and Thane, bridge of magic and compelled truth that now flows both directions. Counselor Thane, did you personally poison Prince Cassian? Thane's smile is confident, expression of someone who has prepared for this exact question and knows his answer will satisfy the right. No, he says simply. The light glows steady, truth confirmed, no flicker or hesitation. Elena's heart sinks. Strategy collapsing, certainty that Thane is guilty meeting apparent proof of innocence. Wrong question, Cassian speaks from the circle's edge, voice quiet but cutting through Elena's despair. Ask if he arranged it, if he conspired to cause the poisoning, even if he did not personally administer the poison. Elena's eyes widen with understanding, with appreciation for the legal and magical distinction Cassian identified. Did you arrange for Prince Cassian to be poisoned? Did you conspire with others to cause his death? Thane's confident smile falters, cracks, shatters completely, as the right grabs hold of truth he clearly hoped to evade through careful phrasing. The light flickers wildly, dims to almost nothing, then erupts in blinding red illumination that burns like fire. Lie detected and punished. Deception exposed with force that makes Thane cry out in pain. Yes, the word is dragged from Thane's throat by magic stronger than his will, scraped out of him like confession under torture. Yes, I arranged it. I conspired with kitchen staff and guards and apothecaries to poison the prince with nightshade derivative in concentrations designed to cause hypothermic death in Dampier physiology while appearing natural. I planned it for months. I wanted him dead. The chamber explodes into chaos, council members shouting, guards moving toward Thane from positions around the room. Aldrich's roar of rage shaking the stone walls. But Thane raises one hand, and the air ripples with power that stops everyone mid-motion, ancient magic rolling off him in waves that reveal his true age and strength. He is older than he appears by centuries. Perhaps millennia, one of the first-generation vampires who remember the world before human civilization, power concentrated through ages of survival and accumulation. You will have your truth, Thane says, voice echoing with centuries of accumulated rage and conviction. Cassian's treaty would have ended our dominance, allowed humans to breed freely with vampires, diluted our blood until we became weak copies of what we were, powerless and mortal and irrelevant. I did what was necessary to preserve our species from extinction through assimilation. By murdering my son, Aldrich says, voice deathly quiet in the way that promises violence more certainly than shouting ever could. By eliminating a mistake, Thane corrects with contempt sharp as broken glass. Your mortal wife never should have borne your child. Cassian is an abomination against natural law, and this human you have leashed yourself to through sanctuary is another weakness waiting to destroy you from within. He moves faster than Elena can track with human eyes, suddenly beside her with one hand on her throat, grip iron and ice, pressure cutting off her air immediately. Sanctuary only protects against murder, Thane says conversationally, while Elena struggles uselessly against strength that could crush her windpipe without effort. It says nothing about taking hostages, nothing about using protected persons as leverage in political negotiations. Release her, Aldrich commands. But there is fear beneath the order, calculation of odds that clearly do not favor immediate action. Or what? Thane smiles while Elena's vision starts to darken at the edges. You will kill me? I am protected by council law as much as you are. My allies outnumber yours 3-1 among the assembled members, and I have leverage now. He lifts Elena slightly so her toes scrape stone, demonstration of his complete control. Harm me, and she dies instantly. Sanctuary binding transfers to the next male in your bloodline if you perish, which means young Cassian inherits the responsibility. Do you really want your son's first act as king to be avenging a human he barely knows, starting a civil war over someone who interrupted a funeral 3 days ago? Let her go, Cassian says, voice shaking with fury barely controlled. Make me. Thane's free hand produces a vial from his coat, the same poison used on Cassian, dark liquid that catches candlelight. 1 drop, and she will join you in hypothermic suspension. Except this time, no one will hear her heartbeat in the chaos. No one will know to rewarm her slowly. No one will save her. Elena's vision blurs completely at the edges, consciousness starting to slip away from oxygen deprivation. But through the haze, she sees something that gives her desperate hope. Dr. Vane moving slowly behind Thane with Predator's patience, pulling a syringe from his medical bag with movements so gradual they barely register as motion, approaching from the blind angle while all attention focuses on the hostage situation. She needs to buy time, needs to keep Thane talking and distracted. Why? Elena gasps out through her constricted throat. Why do you hate peace so much? Thane's eyes meet hers, and for one moment she sees the truth beneath the monster, sees genuine belief and ancient trauma. Because I remember the wars before the treaties, he says. The slaughters when humans discovered fire and numbers could overcome individual vampire strength. The agreements they broke the moment they outnumbered us in any region. Peace is a fantasy humans tell themselves between acts of violence. Survival requires dominance, requires maintaining the fear that keeps them from organizing against us. Survival requires evolution, Cassian says quietly from across the ritual space. Adaptation to changing circumstances. My mother taught me that before she died, giving me life. Your mother was weak, Thane spits the words like poison. Your mother, Cassian says with absolute conviction, was the strongest person I never got to meet. She gave her life to prove that love between species is possible, that we can be more than our worst instincts. And you killed me to erase that proof, to prevent the treaty that would have honored her sacrifice. Vane strikes while Thane is focused on Cassian, syringe plunging into the ancient vampire's neck with clinical precision, thumb-depressing plunger to inject contents directly into major blood vessel. Thane roars, releasing Elena instantly, both hands going to his neck to claw at the injection site. Elena collapses, unable to control her fall, but Aldrich catches her before she hits stone, vampire speed closing the distance in time, measured in fractions of seconds. "What did you?" Thane stumbles, clawing at his neck, voice slurring already. "What did you inject?" "Concentrated silver nitrate," Vane says with perfect medical calm. "Will not kill you but will paralyze your voluntary muscle control for approximately 6 hours. Long enough for proper trial and sentencing under council law." Thane crumples to the floor, body going rigid as the silver spreads through his system. Guards swarm him immediately, producing silver chains from somewhere, binding wrists and ankles with metal that burns vampire flesh on contact, securing the ancient counselor against the floor while he rages and struggles uselessly. Elena coughs, gasping air back into her lungs, each breath painful and precious. Aldrich holds her steady with surprising gentleness for someone strong enough to tear steel, and over his shoulder she meets Cassian's eyes, gray and storm-struck and full of something she cannot name yet, but recognizes in her bones. "It is over," Aldrich says, relief and exhaustion mixing in his voice. But Elena knows better. Knows with certainty born from 18 months of surviving hostile systems that nothing is ever truly over when powerful people lose. Thane had allies, he said so himself, 3-to-1 advantage among council members. And she just became the visible symbol of everything they hate, the human who exposed their conspiracy and humiliated their leader and proved that vampire supremacy is built on lies and fear. Elena spends the next 3 days in the palace medical wing, not as patient requiring care, but as staff member with actual employment for the first time in 18 months. Dr. Vane, grudgingly impressed by her competence during Cassian's resurrection and her performance under the right of truth, offers her a formal position as human physiology consultant to the vampire medical establishment. "Most vampire physicians train in human medicine academically," he explains with slight condescension that does not quite hide genuine respect, studying textbooks and cadavers, but never actually treating living human patients with active pathology. Elena lived it, practiced emergency medicine in understaffed hospitals where theory met desperate reality, accumulated knowledge that no amount of academic study can replicate. She accepts the position without hesitation, barely pausing to consider the implications before agreeing. The alternative is returning to the streets, to sleeping in cathedral vents and begging for soup kitchen meals, and slowly freezing through another winter. And after tasting warm beds and regular meals, and the simple dignity of being treated like a professional instead of invisible garbage, she is not ready to surrender that comfort. The salary Vane quotes is less than she made before the blacklisting, but more than enough to rent actual housing, to rebuild something resembling normal life. Cassian visits daily, ostensibly for follow-up examinations to ensure no lasting damage from the hypothermia and nightshade poisoning. Elena checks his vitals with clinical thoroughness, measuring core temperature and heart rate and neurological responses, documenting his recovery in detailed charts that Vane reviews with approval. But the medical examinations take maybe 15 minutes, and Cassian's visits stretch to 2 hours, then 3, falling into conversations that range far beyond professional boundaries into territory. Elena knows she should probably discourage but cannot quite bring herself to end. They talk about his mother, the human doctor named Sarah who met Aldrich during a plague outbreak 2 centuries ago, saved the vampire king's life with antibiotics that vampire medicine had not yet discovered, fell impossibly in love despite every reasonable objection. Sarah chose to bear Cassian knowing the pregnancy would kill her, Dampier births draining human mothers of life force in ways vampire medicine still does not fully understand, trading her existence for her son's with full knowledge and zero regret, according to the letters she left behind. They talk about Elena's past, medical school attended on scholarships, and student loans that buried her in debt before she ever started earning. Her mother's cancer that consumed their savings and her emotional reserves. The lawsuit when she reported a pharmaceutical company for cutting corners on sterility protocols and falsifying safety data. The company had powerful lawyers and political connections, launched counterclaims accusing Elena of theft and incompetence, destroyed her reputation systematically until no hospital would risk employing her. They destroyed you for telling the truth, Cassian says one evening, sitting on the exam table while Elena reviews his latest blood work results. His tone carries anger on her behalf, outrage at injustice committed against someone he barely knows but has decided to care about anyway. They destroyed my career, Elena corrects, not looking up from the lab reports. I am still here. I survived. Barely. Cassian's voice is soft but insistent. Elena, you were dying on the streets. Slowly, incrementally, but dying nonetheless from exposure and malnutrition and despair. What made you crash my funeral, truly? What made you risk everything to save a stranger? Elena is quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously, examining her own motivations with clinical honesty. I heard your heartbeat, she says finally, setting down the charts to meet his eyes. And I knew everyone else was wrong about you being dead. I could not walk away from that. From someone giving up on you when you were still fighting to survive. Like they gave up on you, Cassian says, understanding clear in his gray eyes. Like the hospitals and the medical board and everyone who should have defended you just walked away and let you fall. Maybe, Elena admits. Or maybe I am just tired of death winning when life is still possible. Tired of people dying because no one bothered to check carefully enough or care deeply enough. Their eyes meet and hold, and the air in the medical wing shifts, becomes charged with possibility neither of them has named aloud yet. I am glad you are tired of death winning, Cassian says quietly. Otherwise I would not be here to have this conversation. Counselor Thane's trial is public, broadcast across both vampire and human territories through technology that bridges the usual separation between communities. The first joint legal proceeding in over a century, designed to demonstrate the treaty's vision of shared justice. Aldrich presides as chief magistrate, seated in judgment over the counselor who tried to murder his son, maintaining perfect judicial composure despite the personal stakes. A jury of 6 vampires and 6 humans sits in special chamber constructed for the occasion, selected through process stipulated by the not yet ratified treaty Cassian nearly died negotiating. Thane, bound in silver chains that burn his skin wherever they make contact, offers no defense against the charges. Instead, he turns his trial into political theater, transforms the proceeding into platform for broadcasting his ideology to millions of watching citizens. I stand guilty of protecting vampire purity, he declares, voice ringing through the packed courtroom with conviction that makes even his enemies pause. Guilty of preventing our extinction through gradual dilution of our bloodline. Prince Cassian's mother was the beginning of this erasure, half-breed offspring legitimized through royal decree, interspecies marriage normalized and celebrated instead of prohibited. Within 3 generations, true vampires will cease to exist, bred out of existence by human DNA that overwhelms our recessive traits. The human jurors look uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, clearly unsettled by framing that positions their very existence as existential threat. The vampire jurors look conflicted, some nodding slightly in agreement with Thane's underlying concerns, even as they prepare to convict him of attempted murder. Elena, seated in the witness gallery wearing clothes nicer than anything she owned before homelessness, feels her stomach turn with sick realization. Thane is not defending himself against the charges. He is recruiting supporters, using his trial as propaganda broadcast to seed his ideology in minds across both territories. Cassian takes the stand as primary victim, wearing formal court attire that makes him look every inch the prince and treaty negotiator. Counselor Thane did not just poison me, he testifies with quiet intensity. He poisoned the possibility of peace between our peoples. He weaponized fear of change, fear of the other, fear of a future we build together, instead of tearing apart in endless cycles of violence and retaliation. A future where you rule as king? Thane challenges from his silver chains, turning the testimony into debate. A half-breed ruler with divided loyalties? How long before you mandate mixed marriages, force integration, erase vampire culture entirely in pursuit of your mother's vision? I do not want to erase anything, Cassian says quietly but firmly. I want to add to what we have. My mother's people have medicine and technology and art. We have never fully explored, because we have been too busy defending borders and maintaining separation. Imagine what we could create together if we directed energy currently spent on conflict toward collaboration instead. I imagine extinction, Thane says flatly. Dressed up as progress and sold as enlightenment. I imagine vampires becoming footnote in human history, absorbed and forgotten. The jury deliberates for 6 hours, longer than anyone expected, clearly wrestling with complicated questions about intent and consequence. They return with split decision that reflects the deep divisions in both communities. The vampire jurors vote guilty of attempted murder, with votes ranging from 8 votes guilty to 4 abstentions. Their verdict focused narrowly on the act of poisoning. The human jurors vote guilty of attempted genocide, framing Thane's actions as effort to destroy the Dhampir population and prevent future mixed heritage births. The combined sentence reflects both verdicts: exile to the Shadowlands, a dimension prison from which there is no return, no communication, no hope of rescue or pardon. As guards lead him away, silver chains burning his flesh with every movement, Thane looks directly at Elena, with eyes full of ancient hatred and terrible certainty. You have won this battle, human, he says clearly enough for the broadcast microphones to catch every word. But my followers number in the thousands across both territories. They will finish what I started. And you, sanctuary or not, will be the first target they choose. Removing you sends the message that vampire protection of humans is theater and illusion. Elena's blood runs cold, terror flooding through her despite the guards and cameras and supposed safety of the courtroom. That night, Elena stands on her suite's balcony, unable to sleep despite exhaustion, watching Ashenmoor's lights flicker below like stars reflected in dark water. The vampire district spreads beneath her in patterns of old magic and older architecture, beautiful and alien, and still fundamentally foreign despite 3 days of employment and tentative belonging. A knock at her door interrupts her spiraling anxiety. Cassian enters without waiting for permission, carrying 2 mugs of tea that steam in the cool night air. Cannot sleep either? He asks, joining her at the balcony railing. Thane is right, Elena says without preamble. I am a target now, visible, symbolic, representing everything his followers hate about the treaty and integration. Every extremist who agrees with his ideology will want me dead to prove that sanctuary means nothing, that vampire protection cannot actually keep humans safe. Then we make sanctuary mean everything, Cassian says firmly, handing her tea. Chamomile with honey, her favorite combination, which means he has been paying attention to details she never explicitly mentioned. We show them that protecting you is not weakness or sentiment, but concrete demonstration of the future we are building. By doing what? Elena asks, skeptical that speeches and symbolism can stop assassins motivated by ideology and backed by Thane's extensive networks. By letting me court you, Cassian says, words simple but devastating in their implications. Publicly, openly, with full transparency. Proving that human and vampire can build something real together, that mixed relationships produce strength rather than weakness. Elena nearly drops her tea, hands shaking enough that liquid sloshes dangerously close to the mug's rim. Court me? Cassian, I was homeless 3 days ago. I am not suitable for royal courtship. I have no family, no status, no political value whatsoever. You are brilliant, He interrupts with intensity that brooks no argument. You are brave enough to interrupt funeral rites to save a stranger. You heard my heartbeat when everyone else heard silence and declared me dead. You saved my life, and in doing so saved the treaty. Saved my father from grief-driven vengeance that would have destroyed the peace negotiations. Saved countless lives that would have been lost in the war Thane wanted to provoke. You are exactly who I want beside me. You do not know me, Elena protests weakly, knowing even as she speaks that the objection is becoming less true with every conversation they share. I know you held my hand when you thought I might seize, Cassian says. I know you chose truth over safety during the rite, even when the questions became invasive and painful. I know that I have been half alive since my mother died, going through motions, negotiating peace because it is what she would have wanted rather than because I believed in it. But when I heard your heartbeat in the dark, when I followed it back to consciousness, I felt something I have not felt in years. Hope, connection, purpose beyond obligation. And I am not ready to let that go. Elena's heart hammers against her ribs, medical training letting her track her own physiological response to emotional stimulus, elevated pulse and rapid breathing, and flood of neurochemicals associated with attraction and possibility. Your father will never approve, she says, grasping for practical objections. The council will object. Half of them already want me gone. My father granted you sanctuary knowing exactly what it meant, Cassian counters. Knowing it would bind our bloodlines together, create obligations and connections. And the council just watched Thane get sentenced to dimensional exile. They are scared, uncertain, looking for leadership that offers stability. They will follow whoever demonstrates strength and vision. He steps closer, close enough that Elena can feel warmth radiating from his body. Dampier metabolism running hotter than full vampires. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make permanent decisions under pressure. I am asking permission to see where this goes, to explore what might be possible between us, if you want that. Elena thinks of the streets, the cold that seeped into her bones and never quite left, the invisibility that made her question whether she still existed in any meaningful sense. She thinks of Cassian's hand in hers during that long resurrection night, the way his pulse felt beneath her fingers, slow at first, and barely perceptible, then gradually stronger, coming back to life beat by beat. She thinks of his gray eyes opening in the surgical theater, the first words he spoke about hearing her heartbeat like lighthouse in darkness. I want that, she whispers, committing to possibility despite every reasonable objection her mind can generate. Cassian smiles, the first real unguarded smile she has seen from him, joy transforming his features from merely handsome to genuinely beautiful. Then let us terrify the traditionalists together, he says. Aldrich calls another council session 3 days later, this one not about trials or accusations, but about the future. Both communities will build or fail to build together. Elena stands beside Cassian and the king at the chamber's center, positioned where petitioners usually stand, but elevated by context to something closer to equal participants. The 13 council seats are filled with members whose expressions range from supportive to openly hostile. Cameras broadcast to both vampire and human territories. Millions watching this moment that will define the next era of their shared history. The treaty my son negotiated is ready for ratification, Aldrich announces without preamble, voice carrying absolute authority. It includes provisions for interspecies, marriage with legal protections, shared governance councils with equal representation, and mutual protection laws that bind both communities to defend each other. In light of Councillor Thane's attack and subsequent trial, the Council has voted to ratify it immediately, rather than waiting for the originally scheduled vote next month. 8 votes in favor, 5 opposed. A narrow margin that reveals how divided the Council remains, but a victory nonetheless. Legal framework now established for the integration Thane died trying to prevent. Additionally, Aldrich continues, and Elena feels her stomach clench with anticipation. Prince Cassian has invoked his right as heir to formally declare courtship intentions under full council witness as required by law when royalty courts outside traditional vampire bloodlines. The chamber goes absolutely silent, shocked stillness that feels like held breath before explosion. Cassian steps forward, taking Elena's hand in his, the gesture visible to every camera and every watching citizen. I am courting Elena Marsh, he says clearly, under full transparency and council witness as law requires. She saved my life through skill and courage. She represents the best of what our two peoples can achieve together, the kind of collaboration and mutual respect the treaty envisions. And I intend to prove through our relationship that our future lies in unity rather than division, in building bridges instead of maintaining walls. The backlash is immediate and visceral, shouts and protests erupting from multiple council members simultaneously, 3 of them storming out of the chamber entirely in dramatic rejection. But Aldrich raises one hand, and the room quiets, power radiating from him in waves that remind everyone present exactly who rules this city and has ruled for 5 centuries. Elena holds my sanctuary, the Vampire King says with absolute finality. Any harm to her is harm to my bloodline, attack on my house that will be answered with full force of royal authority. Any who oppose this courtship may do so politically through proper channels, debate it in council sessions, argue against it in public forums. But violence will be met with absolute retaliation. Are we clear? His ice blue eyes sweep the chamber, meeting each council member's gaze individually, extracting grudging nods of acknowledgement, if not agreement. Elena squeezes Cassian's hand, feeling his fingers squeeze back, both of them understanding that this public declaration has made them targets, but also made their relationship impossible to ignore or dismiss. This is just the beginning, she thinks, of something either wonderful or terrible, possibly both simultaneously. 3 months pass and Elena's life transforms in ways she still cannot fully process or believe, despite living through each day of change. She is the royal medical consultant now, treating human patients in the newly opened shared clinic, a facility created specifically by the ratified treaty and staffed by physicians from both species working side by side in unprecedented collaboration. She has an apartment in the palace, though she insisted on moving from the ornate guest suite to something smaller and less overwhelming, a modest space with functional furniture and windows overlooking the gardens, rather than the grand chambers Cassian initially offered. She has friends, real friends, not the superficial professional connections from her previous life, but genuine relationships built through shared challenges. Mira teaches her vampire etiquette with patience and humor, explaining the subtle hierarchies and gesture languages that govern interactions between different vampire houses. Dr. Vane has become an unexpected mentor, his initial condescension gradually giving way to genuine respect as they consult on difficult cases requiring expertise in both human and vampire physiology. Even a few human palace staff members have stopped seeing her as curiosity or threat and started seeing her as ally, someone who navigates both worlds and advocates for human interests in vampire spaces. And she has Cassian, whose presence in her life feels simultaneously completely natural and utterly impossible. Their courtship is slow, careful, deliberately public, in ways that make Elena constantly aware of watching eyes and political implications. Dinners in restaurants where cameras flash from nearby tables and strangers whisper commentary they think Elena cannot hear. Walks through city districts where human and vampire citizens stop to stare, their expressions ranging from hopeful curiosity to outright hostility. A gala hosted by one of the more progressive vampire houses, where Elena wears a midnight blue dress Cassian chose, silk that flows like water and makes her look like she belongs in his glittering world instead of feeling like fraud playing dress-up. He does not push for physical intimacy or demand declarations, giving her space to process feelings complicated by trauma and rapid change. They talk for hours about everything and nothing, conversations that meander from philosophy to medicine to childhood memories. He shows her the palace library, with its thousands of volumes including human books collected over centuries, teaches her vampire history from perspective she never learned in human schools, listens without judgment when she talks about her mother's illness and her lost career, and the grief that still ambushes her at unexpected moments. They hold hands while walking through gardens. They share quiet moments reading in companionable silence. Once, after a particularly brutal council debate about the treaty's educational integration clauses that left both of them exhausted and discouraged, he rests his forehead against hers and just breathes, finding comfort in simple proximity without needing words. "I am sorry this is hard," he whispers into the small space between them. "It is worth it," she whispers back, meaning the difficulty and the opposition and the constant scrutiny, all of it worth enduring for what they are building together. The first time he kisses her, they are alone in the palace gardens at twilight, sitting on stone bench surrounded by night-blooming flowers whose fragrance fills the cooling air. It is gentle, tentative, his lips barely brushing hers in question, that asks permission, even though she has already given it through weeks of smaller intimacies. When they pull apart, he is smiling with expressions so openly happy it makes Elena's chest ache. "I love you," he says simply, without drama or elaborate declaration. "I think I have, since I heard you tell my father I was not dead, since you fought for me when everyone else had given up." Elena's breath catches in her throat, heart hammering with fear and joy tangled together. "I think I love you too," she admits, "which terrifies me, because I have lost everyone I loved and cannot bear the thought of losing you." "Good," he says, pulling her close again. "Means it is real, not just political convenience or trauma bonding, but actual emotion worth the risk. But not everyone is celebrating their relationship or the changes it represents. The human resistance movement, small and fractured but increasingly loud, holds protests outside the palace nearly every week. Signs reading "Vampires do not love they possess," and "Elena Marsh is a traitor," and "Human women are not vampire property" wave above crowds, whose anger Elena understands even as it wounds her. A few vampire extremist groups join the human protesters, unlikely allies united by hatred of the treaty and everything it represents, by shared conviction that species integration will destroy both communities. One night, someone throws a brick through the shared clinic window, shattering glass across the reception area, where patients sit just hours earlier. Attached to the brick with wire is a note scrawled in angry letters. "You will die screaming, and he will watch," threat specific enough to be terrifying. Cassian finds Elena staring at the note with hands shaking, unable to look away from words that promise her death. He pulls her close immediately, wrapping arms around her and letting her shake against his chest. "We will increase security," he says firmly. "Move you deeper into the palace where access is more restricted. Assign personal guards." "No." Elena's voice is firmer than she feels, forcing herself to straighten and meet his eyes. "If I hide, they win. If I act afraid, every other human considering integration will be terrified into staying separate. I have to be visible, have to prove that threats will not silence me or drive me back into isolation." "Then I will be visible with you," Cassian says without hesitation. "We face this together." They hold a press conference the next day, both of them standing before cameras and reporters from human and vampire media outlets. Elena speaks about the note, about the threats that arrive regularly now, about the resistance from both communities. She speaks about her choice to stay despite danger, to continue working at the clinic and living openly as Cassian's partner. "I am not here because the Vampire King controls me," she says, looking directly into the camera lens. and speaking to the millions watching. I am not some helpless victim or pawn in vampire political games. I am here because Prince Cassian and I are building something new together. Something that scares people on both sides precisely because it means change, means questioning assumptions both communities have held for centuries. But change is how we survive. Together, not separated by fear and mistrust. The clip goes viral within hours, shared across human and vampire social networks, debated in news programs and opinion pieces. Opinion polls shift slightly in response, not dramatically, but measurably. 52% of humans now support the treaty according to latest surveys, up from 48% before Elena's statement. 61% of vampires express approval, a smaller increase but still movement in positive direction. Progress measured inch by bloody inch through constant effort and periodic setbacks, but progress nonetheless. 6 months after the funeral that changed everything, Cassian takes Elena to the place where his mother is buried, a garden on the palace grounds maintained with loving care. A simple stone marker bears minimal inscription: Dr. Isabel Thorne, beloved, brave. Words that cannot capture the complexity of woman who crossed species boundaries and paid with her life. She would have liked you, Cassian says, kneeling to place fresh flowers at the marker's base. She believed in evidence-based medicine, in fighting for patients everyone else wrote off as hopeless cases. You are exactly the kind of person she hoped I would find, someone who sees medicine as calling rather than just profession. Elena kneels beside him on grass still damp with evening dew. I wish I could have met her, she says honestly, wishing she could thank the woman whose choices made Cassian possible. So do I. Cassian is quiet for a long moment, fingers tracing his mother's name carved in stone. Then he turns to face Elena fully, pulling small velvet box from his jacket pocket with hands that tremble slightly. Elena Marsh, I know this is fast. I know we have only had 6 months together, and the world is watching every move we make, and there is pressure from 1,000 different directions. But I do not want to wait anymore. I do not want to wonder what we could be. I know what we are. He opens the box and inside rests a ring, silver band set with stone that shifts between red and blue, depending on angle of light, vampire and human colors merged into single gem. This was my mother's engagement ring, he explains. My father had it made when she agreed to marry him despite every law and tradition telling her not to risk it. She wore it until the day she died, bringing me into the world. And she made him promise that when I found someone who saw past what I was to who I am, I would give it to them. Tears blur Elena's vision, making the ring shimmer and multiply. Cassian continues speaking. Marry me. Not because it is politically strategic, though it will be. Not because it proves a point about integration, though it will. Marry me because I love you. Because you make me want to build a world worthy of the sacrifice my mother made. Because when I was dying in the cold, your heartbeat was the only reason I fought to come back to consciousness. Elena can barely breathe past the tightness in her chest. She thinks of the funeral, the glass coffin, the impossible choice to speak up when silence was safer and easier. She thinks of every step that brought her here, the streets and the hunger and the lost career, and the chance to matter again, to use her skills for something that transcends personal survival. Yes, she whispers, voice breaking. Yes, I will marry you. He slides the ring onto her finger with hands that shake with emotion, and they kiss in his mother's garden while the world keeps spinning, keeps judging, keeps watching their every move. And for once, Elena does not care who is watching or what they think. The wedding is held 3 months later in spring, when the city blooms with flowers and new growth emerges from winter's death. It is the first official union under the new treaty provisions, broadcast live across both territories, attended by dignitaries from every major human nation and vampire court. Elena wears white lace, simple and elegant design that cost more than she wants to think about but feels right, traditional without being ostentatious. Cassian wears traditional vampire formal attire, black tailored jacket with silver accents, and a ceremonial cloak that once belonged to his grandfather, weighted with history and significance. Aldrich presides over the ceremony, speaking the old vampire marriage vows and the new human ones, blending traditions from both worlds into something neither and both simultaneously. When Cassian lifts her veil and kisses her, the crowd erupts in applause, half vampire and half human guests rising from their seats in united celebration. Not everyone is celebrating. The broadcast cameras catch protesters outside the cathedral, angry faces and warning signs predicting disaster. But inside this sacred space, in this moment, there is genuine hope. The reception lasts until dawn breaks over the city, vampire guests staying active through the night, while human guests gradually fade into exhaustion. Elena dances with Aldrich, who tells her quietly, "You gave me back my son when I thought him lost forever. I can never adequately repay that gift." "You gave me back my life," Elena replies honestly, thinking of the streets and the slow death from cold and hunger. "We are even." She dances with Dr. Vane, who has had precisely 2 glasses of wine and is almost smiling, expression softer than his usual professional mask. "I was wrong about you," he admits. "You are a decent physician. For a human. You are a decent person," Elena counters with matching tone. "For a vampire." They both laugh, the sound genuine. At midnight, Cassian pulls Elena onto the balcony away from the crowd and noise, seeking quiet moment together. The city spreads below them, lights twinkling in darkness like stars reflected in water. "Are you happy?" he asks. Question simple but weighted with real concern. Elena thinks carefully about the question. 6 months ago, she was homeless, invisible, dying slowly on the streets with no hope of recovery. Now she is a princess, a pioneer, a symbol of impossible peace between ancient enemies. "I am terrified," she says honestly. "Every day someone wants me dead. Every decision we make will be scrutinized and criticized. We are going to fail sometimes. We are going to make mistakes that hurt people despite best intentions. And I have no idea if this grand experiment in integration will actually work." "That is not an answer to my question," Cassian points out gently. Elena smiles. "Yes, I am happy. Because I would rather be terrified with you than safe and alone." He kisses her, and below the city watches their future unfold. 1 year after the wedding, Elena stands in the shared clinic, reviewing patient charts, routine tasks she performs every morning before seeing scheduled appointments. The clinic has grown substantially, now employing 15 human doctors and 10 vampire physicians, serving thousands of patients from both communities who increasingly trust the integrated care model. Interspecies medicine is becoming recognized specialty with dedicated training programs. Medical schools in both human and vampire territories are adapting curricula to include cross-species physiology and treatment protocols. A young woman enters the clinic looking nervous, visibly pregnant, hands resting protectively on her swollen belly. "Dr. Marsh," she says hesitantly, "I need help. I am human and my partner is vampire, and I do not know if the baby will survive. If I will survive, if this was a terrible mistake." "We will take care of you," Elena says gently, guiding her to exam room with reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are not the first patient in this situation, and you will not be the last. We are learning together how to support mixed heritage pregnancies safely." That night, she tells Cassian about the patient over dinner, describing the woman's fear and hope tangled together. He listens carefully, then takes her hand across the table. "My mother would be proud of you," he says. "Our mother," Elena corrects softly, touching her abdomen where their own secret rests. "Pregnancy confirmed just this morning by Dr. Vane, too early to announce publicly, but too precious to keep entirely silent." Cassian's eyes widen with comprehension. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" he asks breathlessly. We are going to have a baby, Elena whispers. Half vampire, half human, like you. For a moment he is speechless, expressions cycling through shock and joy and fear. Then he laughs, pulling her close across the table, and she feels his emotions all tangled together, complex and overwhelming and beautiful. Outside, the world continues its slow, fractious march toward peace, progress and setbacks, alternating in frustrating rhythm. Inside, two people who were never supposed to meet, never supposed to love, build a future from the impossible. And somewhere in the cathedral's heating vents where a homeless woman once slept and heard a dying prince's heartbeat, life goes on.